Record. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Anatolian Dispatch, one of several podcasts sponsored by Aval News, your best source of information on all things Turkish. Anatolian Dispatch looks at Turkey's foreign relations, especially but by no means exclusively with the United States and other NATO partners. With us today, again, is Dr. Chris Kilford, a longtime member of the Canadian Defense Forces, formerly Defense Attaché in Ankara, Turkey, and also cross-accredited to a number of neighboring countries. If you would like more bio information on Dr. Kilford, please feel free to look at some of our older episodes in which we detailed all the great work he has done. So without further ado, Chris, if we can, let's start with just your first thoughts on the fact that the United States has finally joined a bunch of other countries in declaring the events of 1915 in Turkey to be an Armenian genocide.
Oh, thanks, Ed, and thanks for having me on the program. And well, look, we all expected it, and Turkey expected this as well. We had Congress come out with a bipartisan declaration recently. President Biden had talked about recognizing the Armenian genocide before, and of course he'd phoned President Erdogan the day beforehand, and then there we go. We had the United States coming out and President Biden acknowledging that the Armenian genocide was, in fact, it was a genocide, and the events were such. Now, as expected, Turkish response was quite negative, very angry. It always is in these cases. There was nothing new there, but what we did see, of course, is Turkey calling on the United States and Armenia and others, to come together and establish a joint commission. Armenia's never agreed to that because they say, well, we don't need to prove what's already proven, and many scholars have looked at this issue and written about it, and people accept that it was a genocide. But of course, as you can imagine, for Turkey, it makes them very angry because they point to the wider issues that were taking place in that region during the Balkan Wars, with mass expulsions, and then what happened in Turkey proper itself during the First World War. Many horrible things took place. And they don't particularly like the fact that the Armenian issue is singled out as it is. And so that's why they do take exception. But I mean, looking at the scholarship, one would say that a genocide occurred. And so, there's nothing to be gained out of this except it causes issues. It has, as I've spoken before, caused issues between Canada and Turkey. We recognized the genocide, our government, in 2004, and that has caused some friction. Other countries have followed suit. Even Russia in 1995, the State Duma said it was a genocide. And when President Putin visited Armenia in 2015, he also talked about the Armenian genocide. So many countries do this. Is there a resolution to this? Well, I suppose if a lot of leading academics descended on Turkey and got into the archives even more so than they have, would if they came out and said, look, it's a genocide, here's all the proof, would Turkey even accept it at that point? So calling on a joint commission is just, it's just there. They say it. So, here we are. It's another little dent in the relationship between the United States and Turkey, when you really don't need any more at this point. But it's over. I guess that's what you could say. It's over. There's no more waiting around and expectations of what might happen and lobbying in Washington and whatnot. So it's over, and now you move on. Yeah.
I think it's over is a great summation of what this is all about. When will the Turkish leadership, political leadership, ever accept it and therefore start talking to their own population about the atrocities and massacres that occurred, coming up to the standard of what we now call a genocide? I don't know how long that's going to take. I do think that one thing that might help move in that direction is simply the fact that, as you mentioned, the United States came to this quite late. I mean, most other countries that have really any sort of importance to the Turkish attitude have already said this. I mean, most of the countries of Europe have said it. Canada said it well before the United States. Russia has said it. It's just, it's almost in a sense losing some of its clout.
Yeah.
I don't expect that there will be people calling for a rupture in the U.S. relations, or calling for, the Turkish ambassador to be called back to Ankara for consultations and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, it adds friction to a relationship that right now would do better to not have so much friction. The timing, of course, is determined by the fact that April 24th is considered the day by Armenians that the genocide started, with the roundup of intellectuals and others, Armenians, in what was then still called Constantinople, which is an interesting little factoid from history. So yeah, I really think the impact will be more muted than a lot of people supposed. There's some interesting thoughts about what it says and how much it says about the President Biden foreign policy moving forward. My own view is that they did the calculus and figured out that the domestic political gain was going to be greater than the foreign policy loss.
Yeah. I think another issue too is Turkey will point out that the United States and other countries don't have that stellar records either. Certainly when you look at when it comes to their own people, and when you look at the Canada, with the way the indigenous population was treated in our country, it was quite horrible. And yes, Turkey has every right to point out to us that we have engaged in some very poor practices ourselves. But where the difference is we accept that.
Right.
We apologize. Welcome to Canada. We apologize. We've apologized to everybody and everything we can think of, and we try to make amends. We try to say, look, yes, we get it. It was wrong, and now we're going to move on. Let's see how we can repair that relationship. Now, you don't get that in Turkey, and part of that, of course, is because, as we've discussed before, this is actually a country that is still at war with itself. Right. It's at war with its own population, and we've talked about the Gulen movement. We've talked about the Kurdish issue in the country, and we saw some horrible fighting in 2015 and 2016. Yes. How do you ever reconcile that? And this is in the 21st century, let alone starting to try to tidy up what's happened and acknowledge what's happened a century ago. So you're just not in the country itself is not in that mindset to start to try to make amends for what's happened in the past. And so there we sit.
Right. I mean, this is I think it's both of us come from from historical training. You went much further academically than I did in history, but there is an obligation upon historians to be honest, even about their own country's history. And that is something that I think is pretty much accepted as a standard in what somebody like Neil Ferguson would call the Anglosphere, that Canadian, American, British, Australian, New Zealand universities have this notion that you do historical research and you bring out the truth, even if it says things unpleasant about your own nation. So both the United States and Canada have had to confront the truth of our incredibly terrible treatment of indigenous populations. Neither one of us has, I mean, most Americans who've studied this would say that you guys did much better than we did. So, but both of us have scholarly traditions and history that say you speak the truth even if it is painful to the memories of your kind of collective national memory. And that is something that that I don't think Turkey has yet embraced. Its academics might have embraced it, but its political leadership has not gotten there. And that's not just the Armenian genocide, that's also its relationship with the Kurdish population, its relationship with other minority populations in the country, the Syrian Arabs, you know, the Assyrians, and what's the other group? Other small Christian, Syriac Christians and others that they haven't really, it always gets wrapped up into nativism and nationalism in politics. And that's a shame. And so,
yeah, it's one of many minefields that any Turkish politician, no matter what party they're in, wants to avoid and will continue to avoid.
Right.
Because there's just no substantial voice in Turkey that has any power to open up these conversations, because you'll be shut down immediately.
Right.
And, you know, I suppose, speaking from a Canadian perspective, it sometimes takes someone to make the first move. If Turkey would make the first move, others in the region who have had issues with one another would all come forward and say, you know, we got to acknowledge what happened. We've got to move forward. It's so hard to do, though. That's the thing. I'm talking as a Canadian, because if you go into the region right now, what do you find? You find Greece and Turkey facing off with one another. You've got Turkey in the Middle East and all these issues, and Central Asia, I mean, and Russia's there too. So nothing is really changed, and no one is going to apologize for anything.
Right, and that's the real hard part, is getting anyone to admit that they do owe some people an apology. But let's shift away from the problems Turkey has confronting its past, and let's talk about Turkey in the present right now, and how is President Erdogan going with the region, with Greece, with Russia, with Ukraine?
And with alcohol sales, which I have just noted have been banned for the next couple of weeks until Turkey gets through the COVID situation. Lots of things on the table, and I was doing some work the other day, and I drew a map of Turkey, and I had around it, I had these 6 blocks, and there are arguably more, but we have continuing issues with the relationship with the European Union, with Russia, with Central Asia, the Middle East, the United States, and NATO. And all of them are around Turkey, pushing and pulling, and there's a lot of tension. So that's where we sit today. So if you are sitting in Ankara, you're trying to manage all of this, and it's incredibly difficult. So, but is it really any different than it was before? Well, I think what we're seeing in Turkey, of course, is more and more of the use of hard power to resolve situations.
Right.
And there's a lot of boundary crossing as well, things that wouldn't have been done in the past because it was a stretch, too far. But now it seems to be okay. Let's push in all of these different directions, and we don't care as to what the fallout is. Well, the fallout is the economy is in poor shape. You watch the lira every day with trepidation, and you worry about the average daily lives of Turks. And if you're in the government, you're wondering how you can bail yourself out before the 2023 election. So these are all pressing concerns. Now, being a historian, of course, and you can go back in time, and I've just finished reading Jeremy Seale's book on the Menderes period. This is nothing new for Turkey. They've always faced these issues, but there have been different outcomes, whether it was a military coup or governments collapsing and endless coalition governments. But it's something they've had to wrestle with. But they're still, here we are, it's 2021, and they're still wrestling with it. And arguably, we could be heading into a situation like we had 20 years ago with the collapse of the economy and the fallout that comes with that. So it's not good. I mean, it's not good. No matter how you try to dress it up, the current situation in Turkey is not good. There's no political capital left in any let's say Western capital, and I would even say in places like Moscow, where they're really getting fed up with the relationship, and you wonder where that will go.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem that. So I recently wrote a piece about saying why did this Armenian genocide resolution finally happen? And in a nutshell, basically, it was what I said earlier, that the downside in the relationship with Turkey did not outweigh the upside for domestic politics. But let's be honest, everybody in the kind of know about what took place in 1915 accepted, decades ago in the United States, accepted that it was a genocide. But we would not say it simply because we did not want to offend Turkey. Well, what's happened over the last 10 years is the interest of the American foreign policy community and foreign policy decision makers, in their interest in not offending President Erdogan / Turkey has diminished greatly. In fact, there are members of the US foreign policy community who are committed to offending Turkey if they can. Now, they're incredibly foolish to think that way. And they also have a problem separating President Erdogan from Turkey. He will not be around forever. And I think it would be a gross miscalculation to assume that President Erdogan is the representative of all Turks and all attitudes, policy plans, etc., of the Turkish population. So, a strategy of we don't really care whether we offend him or not. Okay, it might be a little childish, but it's probably not real bad unless it spills over into turning the Turkish people and against the West, the US, NATO, etc. What do you think?
Yeah, I always, being a historian, look at these things from a historical perspective.
Yeah,
obviously, I get pragmatic. I'm somewhat pragmatic. Yes, I mean, the relationship we have right now is on the surface, it's very poor. But Turkey is Turkey, and they're still part of NATO, and they're still helping in many areas, and so you have to take that into consideration. And when you go back and you look at this relationship with Turkey over time, Adnan Menderes was off to planned to go and see Khrushchev in July 1960 before he was deposed, because he needed Russia's help. He needed money to keep the economy going, and he wasn't getting that help from the US or Europe. And then if you were Prime Minister Inunu in 1964 and you get the Johnson letter telling you that to take your eyes off of Cyprus, and we're not going to come and help you if the Soviet Union decides to take action if you occupy the island. So we have, that particular low point. It's just part of that relationship. I mean, really, Turkey is an extension of the Ottoman Empire. It's a country that had a lot of influence. Went through a period where it had to focus on itself, but now is sort of back on the international stage, using its hard power and its soft power, and trying to present itself as a major player, and in many respects it is. And in doing so, though, it's causing all of this friction. They bought the S-400, and we've spoken about the S-400 before. But if you go back 30 years ago, and you had Boris Yeltsin and Suleiman Demirel coming together, there's an agreement on weapons sales, and you start to see Turkey buying Russian equipment, armored vehicles and helicopters and sniper rifles and all sorts of other agreements on defense taking place. And then you come to the S-400 issue, and we might have stood a chance of writing out the S-400 issue, but I think because the United States in particular was so upset with President Erdogan that it just made it was the perfect opportunity to use the S-400 to bash President Erdogan, and now, because everybody is so they're in their own corners, there's seems to be no way out of this at this point, except to try to ignore each other. Yeah. So I mean, there is that, there's always precedents, and it's always important to reflect on it, to try to understand where you currently sit. I would imagine when I do look at the situation right now, I see the European Union, I see the NATO, I see the United States, and even countries like ourselves who were very keen on pursuing free trade with Turkey. I think everybody's just trying to tiptoe around and manage this relationship, and probably have their eye on the 2023 election and how will that play out, and the people that are optimistic and don't like President Erdogan will be hoping that he leaves the scene. But we'll have to see.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is you mentioned having a historical perspective, and I think one element of that is in recent history, there are still far too many people in the U.S. foreign policy community who think that there were some great halcyon days of wonderfully close cooperative relationship between Turkey and the United States. And by extension between Turkey and NATO. I don't think that Turkey has ever been known as a really problematic member of NATO, but at the same time, there have been many times in the past when there's been tension between Turkey and the other members of NATO, and between the United States. You mentioned the Johnson letter, and that's not the only hiccup that there has been. And there's among some of our military and also some of our national security people, although most of them have kind of moved out of government at this point in their lives, there was some sort of notion that sometime in, I guess it was the 1960s and 70s, the relationship between Turkey and the United States was a blissful, almost romantic, newlyweds, getting together, and that's never been the case.
No, because you had the first free and fair elections in Turkey in 1950, and then joining NATO. But 8 years later, after joining NATO, there's a coup, and you've got a military government, right? And then you saw the same thing happen again in 1974 with the invasion of Cyprus and the occupation. We had arms embargoes on Turkey. That was in the genesis of their desire to create their indigenous arms industry.
Right.
And then there are other cases like Iraq 2003 and the denial of a second front across the Turkish-Iraqi border by the Turkish parliament. So this is a relationship that is fraught with issues, and it's because of the spot in the world that Turkey sits in as well. And as we've spoken about before, the desire of the West to become involved in the Middle East, consistent desire, has created the conditions that Turkey then has to live with. I mean, yes, from time to time, there are players in all of this at the beginning, but I mean, they didn't invade Iraq. They didn't topple the Libyan government. They, had a hand in Syria, but that was also, a big part of the Western agenda. And so, from a contemporary perspective, that's the world that we kind of created, and they have to live in. And so I'd like to say that even if President Erdogan was to leave tomorrow, that the situation would change and things would be better, but it won't be.
It would change. Whether it would change for the good or not is an open question.
Any Turkish politician, regardless of the party they belong to, and I'll put the HDP aside. But let's say if the EA party or the CHP or anybody coming in is going to have to deal with exactly the same problems, and the economic problems, the PKK issue, Russia. Nothing changes, and it's a typical case of Inunu in the Second World War, maneuvering between Russia and the Allies and the Germans, and trying to keep out of things as best they could. And any Turkish politician who comes after Erdogan will still have to do the same thing.
Yeah. I want to touch on one thing you mentioned, Turkey using a lot of hard power rather than soft power. Do you think that's likely to continue? And can you talk about some of the places where they're doing that?
Yeah, well, where you see Turkish hard power being used, of course, is in Syria. That's the first case. But then you've seen Turkish military assets in Libya. You've seen them used in Iraq. Of course, Turkey has people in Iraq anyway, looking out for the PKK and so forth. And then you see more Turkish assets deployed recently in Azerbaijan, in Somalia. We can't forget Qatar when the blockade was in place, and Turkey established a small base with a footprint there as well. So they've been relying on hard power. Interestingly, of course, as the military is in so much turmoil, another 500 or so people, there are arrest warrants out for them right now over the last few days, and some of them are serving military people. So there's a lot of unrest within the military, but they are being used as arguably the main tool of Turkish foreign policy in the region, and I even forgot to mention the Eastern Mediterranean. So there, I've said it, because that's another flashpoint. Soft power, I don't think Turkey's totally given up on soft power. No. Their embassy networks in Africa, they're taking over of formerly Gulen-run hospitals and schools, etc. It's still ongoing, but that's not really been the focus. Look, 10 years ago was all about the Turkish Olympiads and bringing people together, and the use of soft power was at the forefront. It's changed a lot since the Arab Spring started. Yeah.
So you mentioned in passing that this may not be helping them in relations with a lot of their neighbors. The use of the hard power. Obviously, this does not sit well with some people. One could say Assad first, but also it seems to have created concerns among some of the, people who, if they were not allies or very friendly towards Turkey, were at least not in bad relations with them. But it may seem to be souring some of their regional relationships. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it creates a mini arms race in the region, yet another one, where you see Greece wanting to acquire ships and fighter jets and so forth, and they don't have the money for this. Look, this is the thing. No one in the region has money for more arms. That's not where you want to put what cash you do have available.
Right.
And if you're in Turkey and you've watched the lira fall, if you are importing weaponry, and they still do, it costs more and more and more, and that shouldn't be the priority. But look, it is a difficult situation there. How do you de-escalate? is there anybody that can come in there and start to say to people, look, enough is enough? Even NATO and whatnot doesn't have the ability to do that and to de-escalate. So unless there's some sort of big gathering that comes together to say, can we just stop and start to try to figure out where we're going to go? Now, if you do that, though, you have to reconcile yourself to the fact that Assad is not going to go,
Right.
and you're not going to see any change in the leadership in Egypt and so forth. Are there any bright spots on the future? Well, we might say, let's see how the elections go in Libya.
Right. Yeah.
Perhaps there could be some resolution there. Will this peacekeeping effort in Azerbaijan, Armenia, will that bear any fruit? Will things calm down? Maybe so. But these bright spots are few and far between, and they can be toppled so quickly by another event occurring close by. So I'm not optimistic. I think the Turkish government is going to have to wrestle with a lot of issues. They could certainly use all the help that they can get. Not overt help, but I mean, some encouragement, but I just don't see that coming from anywhere right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right about this. I think, so I was, you know, the timing, as I said about the genocide thing, was clear. But I mean, one of my points was that there's no one left, at least in the United States foreign policy community, at a senior level. I mean, there are people who are mid-level, and there are people who are outside of the U.S. foreign policy community. I mean, you know, not part of the Biden team, who are interested in, you know, maintaining some sort of relationship with Turkey. Unfortunately, at the senior level, it is difficult to identify anybody either in the State Department or the National Security Council or over at CIA who is really an advocate for Turkey and for a positive engagement with Turkey. The only one who comes to mind is Toria Nuland, but she's not going to get sideways with Secretary Blinken. So, and I don't want to say that she would be an advocate for Turkey, you know, with no conditions. I mean, she's a tough negotiator, but she's smart, and she recognizes that even though Erdogan might upset you from time to time, we're not going to pick up Turkey and move it to another part of the world. It's where it is, and geography matters. It's a country of 85 million people or so, in an incredibly geostrategic important place. I mean, that's inescapable.
Yeah, and you know, what's the highlight of Turkish diplomacy right now? It's drone diplomacy, weapons carrying drone diplomacy. And you see this in Syria, Libya, Azerbaijan, and now even with, you know, there have been sales to Ukraine, but there are planned additional sales to Ukraine, and of course that's made the Russians upset. But that's you know, sadly the high point right now is the armed drone. That's what we have to offer the world, and that's not something that I think you want to build your legacy around as a country. So yeah, I just see difficult days ahead.
Yeah.
And we will just wait for the 2023 election.
Yeah. And
find out what happens on the day after.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have to wrap up. And we've had a couple of stutters, so I don't know what's going on with the internet today. I hope I'm not being trolled by some member of MIT. So,
it could be us down here as well, or up here, I should say.
Yeah. So again, thanks very much. I hope maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now we can do this again. As I like to say, there's always something happening in Turkey that is of interest, and I think I think it's important for people to be aware of Turkey and it does play an important role, I think, in the foreign policy of both our countries and of the West, meaning NATO and the EU writ large. So hopefully this will keep going on, and we will be, following. I am going to look into this book by Jeremy Seal. Yeah, we'll see how that goes, and we're looking forward to some publications from Dr. Kilford. I hope there's some in the works. Yeah,
I do have a book chapter coming out very soon on Canada-Turkey relations, and another one on Canada's role in the Middle East.
Okay, in the Middle East. Okay, very good. Chris, we're hitting some more stuttering, so I'm going to have to end the conversation.
North
Don't
Africa,
go far.
so there is something coming.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap up. Thank you for listening to Anatolian Dispatch. Tell your friends and get more people interested in this very important topic for Turkish and relations with Western nations. Thanks. Bye-bye.